Welcome to Fish Tales, a project of the Gloucester Writers Center, presented with Gloucester Stage Company. I'm MJ Boylan, and I'm a proud member of both organizations. I'm here tonight at Gloucester Stage, and I've got to say, in a way, it's a little bit of a nightmare, and I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about all these empty seats. If you want to make a theater person cry, what you do is you tell them the show's about to start, and you just see empty seats. But this is a whole new age, and Gloucester Writers Center and Gloucester Stage, even though they're closed to the public for a while, both organizations are going to be continuing to bring some terrific programming. Tonight, that's Fish Tales, and we've got some terrific storytellers for you tonight. I want to thank Henry Freeney, the director of the Gloucester Writers Center, and Kaycee Breton, the Writers Center storyteller in residence, Bob Walsh, the artistic director of Gloucester Stage, and Chris Griffin, the managing director of Gloucester Stage. All involved have gone to great lengths to make this happen, not least of which is putting in place all these careful protocols to ensure the safety of our artists and our technicians. Tonight's theme is redo, and after all these weeks in quarantine, I think we're probably ready for one. Welcome. Brian Orr is a pediatrician, an artist, and an all-around good guy. And this wasn't in his bio, but I'm not making this up. He actually takes care of orphans in Honduras. Brian comes from an Irish-American family, and so that's about all the street cred he needs as a storyteller. They call it blarney, but in my Irish-American family, we call it embellishment.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Orr, and I just wanted to start this Fish Tales by saying that I know we're all going through the coronavirus thing. We're all safe here and distant and wearing masks on the way in. It's a hard thing. We'd like to all redo this whole thing, this whole coronavirus thing. I don't think that's going to be possible. So I think we all have to do our best to do this, get over this together. And the best way is wash our hands really well, social distance, and keep a mask on when you're outside. So thanks. And my story, when I thought about this story for Fish Tales, I thought a few things. One, my story is about baseball, because we all miss baseball. And there's also a lesson about disappointment, but then seeing a silver lining, which is a very good lesson for what we're going through here with the coronavirus. So my story starts when I was a young child in doing baseball with my brothers. I had 3 brothers, and we played baseball all the time. We were just always playing baseball. And for a large part of it, we had to umpire ourselves. So if I hit a double and my brother called me out and I thought I was safe, we'd get into this intellectual argument saying, I was safe, you were out, I was safe, you were out, I was safe, you were out. And so eventually, if we could not intellectually come to a resolution, we would say, okay, do over. Let's do it again. Let's redo it. And that was not always a fair solution, but that was our solution in refereeing ourselves. So now come to my first Little League team. My younger brother was on the team with me. And as we started the team and we were practicing, the coach noticed that my brother and I, because we played baseball all the time, could throw pretty straight. So, and me being the older of the two, he said, let me give you a few pointers. His name was Yogi. He wasn't the Yogi of baseball, but he was a Yogi of Little League baseball in my town. And he said, let me give you a few pointers. He said, point your toe and the ball will follow. That was his reframe. So as you wound up and pitched and you pointed your toe, the ball would follow straight. And he said, you're doing so well with this, you're going to start our first game. So there I was in our first game. I was the starting pitcher. And it was very exciting. First Little League game to be starting this game for our team. And so I get out on the mound and, I point my toe and ball 1. First batter, ball 1. And I follow, point my toe, ball 2. and then ball 3 and ball 4. So I walked my first batter, and that's okay. All right, I had little nerves and stuff. So I go to the next batter, and I walk that one too. Third batter comes up. Coach is saying, point the toe. The ball will follow. That was not happening, and I walked the third batter. So I have the bases loaded, nobody out, and the coach gives me some encouragement from the dugout. But the catcher comes out to talk to me. Now, catchers often do that in the big leagues to kind of calm people down and stuff. So he comes out and he tells me, I think you should intentionally walk this next batter. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I know this guy, and this guy is a big hitter, and I think you should walk him. I said, did Yogi, our coach, did he put you up to this? Is he telling me to walk him? And he said, no, I just know this kid, and I think you should walk him. So I said to a catcher, I don't know if you've noticed, but I have unintentionally walked 3 batters in a row. And I've done that with great efficiency on 12 straight pitches. And so I don't know if walking batters was the aim and the goal of baseball, I would be batting 1,000. Now, notice that was a baseball reference within my baseball story, but anyway. So I talked to him. I said, look, I'm doing a pretty good job walking people. Let's just play this out and see how this goes. And so he walks back to his position, and as he's walking back there, I was actually annoyed. I was annoyed with him. I had the audacity to come out and want me to walk in a run because his friend who's batting is a good hitter, and I was mad. And so I looked at his glove, and I said, I was determined. I said, well, this next pitch is going to be. So I wound up, and I threw the ball. And I threw this best pitch. It was a perfect pitch. Just a little sidebar, there's perfect pitch in music, but nobody knows what the heck that is. Nobody knows whether they have it or not. Nobody knows anything about perfect pitch in music. Great debates about it. But in baseball, there's no debates about a perfect pitch. A perfect pitch is a pitch that is thrown perfectly. And so this pitch is going right towards the catcher's glove, just going right to it. And I'm seeing it in slow motion, and I see this ball going right to the glove. And I'm just waiting for that little pop into the glove and the little dust that comes from the catcher's glove when it goes in there, and the call of the strike. And I'm watching this, and all of a sudden I see that the ball, in a split second, is suspended in air. And it's not going anywhere. It's not, and the catcher's glove isn't being popped. And all of a sudden, the ball is actually getting bigger. And it's getting bigger, and it's coming fast, and it's coming right for my head. So now a good baseball player would snap up their glove and catch the ball and maybe double play with the guy on third base. But for me, I was not a good baseball player. I was a little leaguer. So I did what most little leaguers do. I threw my glove up in the air, and I ducked. Fight or flight response can save lives when it's used appropriately. So I ducked, and I turned around to watch this ball going into the outfield. Now, this ball was going parallel to the ground for an extraordinary period of time. It was hit so hard, it just stayed straight over second base and into the outfield. It was hit so hard, it had a gravitational force of its own, so that the baseball, the center field grass actually came up and kissed it a little bit to keep it at the same level for a long time. It got past our center fielder, so of course our center fielder gave chase to it, and he didn't come back until the third inning. And so I think it landed in the next town or something. So when I straightened up from watching this ball, the catcher was there in front of me. And so he says to me, I told you so. And, I told you so should be 4 words that should not be used in regular language. It should not be, you should not put those 4 words together. I told you so. It just makes the person feel like punching you in the nose. I mean, that's the way you feel. Now, fortunately, the catcher had his face mask on, so it would have been useless. So I didn't do that, and I've never punched anybody in the nose. But it made me feel that way. So, fortunately, the coach showed up because I think he either noticed some friction or was tired of my perfect pitching. So when the yogi showed up, I looked at him pleadingly and I said, "Do-over?" And he said, "No, there's no do-overs in Little League. There's no crying in baseball, and there's no do-overs in Little League." And so he just pointed to center field, which we were missing a player there. And so I dejectedly walked out to center field with my glove. And you know, here I was so excited about pitching my first Little League game. And after 4 batters, I had not gotten an out. I had not technically even thrown a strike. I walked 3 batters in a row, and I gave up a grand slam. I mean, it was a bad display. And so I went to outfield, and I was really kind of bumming. But then once I was in the outfield, I recognized that, you know, when you're out in a faraway place in the Little League, and there's not a lot of play out there, you realize that you can get a little sense of freedom, that you're not really responsible for anything, and you can just relax a little bit. So I got that feeling of freedom, and I realized that there are some things I could do, like that a lot of Little Leaguers do. I started looking at cloud formations, and I chased a butterfly for a little while, and then I picked my nose and made believe that nobody could see me. And I even searched for some earthworms and found a ladybug. I mean, these are the things that Little Leaguers just love to do when they don't have responsibilities on the field. And they still do it today when they have a chance. So this story is a story of disappointment, but, you know, there's always a silver lining, and we have to take advantage of those silver linings. And this lesson is very much important today. Thank you.
Erina McWilliam-Lopez has just launched something called an energy ball company, which makes a lot of sense looking at the rest of her life. This mover and shaker started out her career as a high schooler working for the Cape Ann Food Co-op. And it was that model of shared ownership that has followed her through the world of finance and academia. She's also a media correspondent for 1623 Studios. Who would want to redo all that? I haven't heard her story yet, but evidently there was a day in 1997 in downtown Gloucester where she just wasn't having it.
What comes to mind for me is actions, decisions that, looking back, I wish they could be redone. I think we all have moments that we wish we could redo. 22 years ago, I was 16 years old. I was going to Gloucester High School. I had a shaved head. There I am, just for proof, with my shaved head. This picture actually looks like it was 122 years ago. But anyway, I was very rebellious. I was schooled by hip hop, I would say. I listened to Tupac Shakur and The Roots, and the lyrics really brought to life the Black American experience, which was not close to my own experience, but it broke my heart, and it put a fire in my belly to change the system. And so one night, Saturday night, I got out of my work shift at the Cape Ann Food Co-op and walked downtown to meet my friends, Jeff and Alyssa. Jeff had a mohawk. He was pretty cool. He was the lead singer of a punk rock band. And Alyssa, his girlfriend, had purple hair. So there we were, chit-chatting in front of a sandwich shop on Main Street in Gloucester. We probably looked a little crazy at the time, you know, all kind of weird hair and just hanging out. The cops rolled up on us and told us we had to leave. So me looking for every opportunity to engage in civil rights, I felt like, why do we have to leave? We're just standing on the street. So I audaciously told them that they didn't have the right to make us leave because we weren't breaking the law. That didn't go very well. After some words were exchanged and I got more heated about it, I was thrown up against the cop car and put into handcuffs, and shortly thereafter, Jeff and Alyssa were also handcuffed and put in the back of the car with me. So the three of us, we were arrested, and that Monday morning, in a cover story, the headline was, "Teen Mob Assaults Police." Wow. I'm not sure how the three of us became a teen mob or how me questioning the authority of the police turned into an assault. I really, up until that point, had very little experience questioning authority. The only experience I had in doing that was the authority of my parents. So this was a really big shock. It was life coming at me fast. And I know not every police officer would have reacted in that way. I know there are a lot of amazing, really good people on the police force. But this was a very negative experience, and the consequences of that were that I ended up with a lot of hours of community service, going to probation during that time. And one of those weeks, I forgot to get my community service hours signed, and the cops came to Gloucester High School and shackled me, this time in the ankles, and I spent a day in the holding cell just waiting for the error to be solved. So anyway, I'm an adult now. I'm using a very different approach to changing the system. I've completely redone my approach, in fact. But I've learned that you can have the same belief, the belief that things should be more fair, but you really have to figure out what is going to be the most powerful approach to get the right outcome. And so I still wake up every day with a fire in my belly, but this time my approach is working to change the system through the lens of investing, through education, and through storytelling. And you better believe that I still question authority, but in a very different way.
Mari Martin is a fifth-generation Rockporter, and she's also a librarian and singer. And by singer, I mean she shared the stage with Tower of Power and Moody Blues, and she's actually sung for Kenny Loggins. So obviously not your average librarian. Words, whether spoken or sung, are her joy.
I never thought I would move back. Never. If you had told me at age 17 that I would be moving back to take care of my elderly father at age 42, I wouldn't have believed you. I would not have believed you. And yet that's what I did. Growing up in my little town was not easy. It was even less diverse than it is now. And I had a rough childhood. Family life was not good. School life was not good. I was mercilessly bullied from grade 5 through 10. I came home crying every day from school. I was hit, kicked, spit on, emotional, sexual, physical abuse, you name it. But one of the worst perpetrators was actually pulled from school. But yes, so I would come home every day crying, and my father's solution was to take me aside and say, "You don't need anybody. Stop crying. You don't need anybody. You just need me. You don't need friends. You just need me." And yeah, my family life wasn't that great either. My parents couldn't stand each other, and living with that was tough. My father had multiple affairs. My mother was sick for most of my childhood, and she didn't really like me. My father fostering a bit of a too close relationship certainly didn't help my relationship with my mother, but we just didn't get along. My sister, who was older, the way she coped with our family life was by starting to drink and do drugs at a very young age. I remember her telling me she was 10 when she first started smoking marijuana. And because she was so much older than me, she was kind of my built-in babysitter, which she resented, and I don't blame her for that. So she would take me to parties where she and her friends would be drinking and doing drugs, and not just marijuana, but heroin also, shooting up heroin, yes, in my little town. She never did. She never shut up. But I still remember that acrid smell, that vinegar, acrid sweat smell of people shooting up. And her friends were also wildly inappropriate with me. My brother was a lot older. He was 12 years older, and he moved out of the house when I was 6. So I never really knew him. I kind of idolized him. He's very handsome. He was a track star. We used to go to his track meets, but I never really knew him. So my way of coping in the beginning was to run. I ran away. I remember old Mrs. Williams calling my parents, saying that I was camped out in her front yard with my sleeping bag, pillow, and my wind-up alarm clock. And would they come and get me because it was getting dark and she was starting to get worried. So, and I ran a few more times after that, but as I got older, I used a different coping mechanism, alcohol. I began to drink. My whole family drank. I learned from the best. I really began to drink in earnest when I was 13. 13 was kind of a tough year. I was 13 years old. For my 13th birthday, one of my family members gave me 13 lines of cocaine. And I almost had a heart attack. And I was on the floor of the bathroom with severe heart palpitations. And they were standing over me laughing. So I don't tell you all of this to make my family sound horrible. I really don't. I'm just telling you this because it was imperative for me to leave. I needed to go. And I'd always had a restless spirit. And so the week after I turned 18, I went out to Western Mass to go to college. And I couldn't wait to leave. And I did love it out there, the hippie, happy valley, Pioneer Valley. I lived in a fabulous dorm. It was kind of like a family. That definitely helped me a lot. It was a great 7 years out there. But I started to get restless. And my senior year, the first week of my senior year, my mother died. She had had cancer before, and it had come back, and within 4 months, she was dead. And like a lot of trauma, that can bring up a lot of stuff. And so I realized that I felt the urge to run, and I took a couple of months off from work, and I drove cross country to see the country and to see where I might want to live. And I fell in love with San Francisco. Oh, I loved San Francisco. It was like Northampton on steroids, but by the sea. I loved it. And I came back to Massachusetts and said, that's where I'm going. I'm going to San Francisco. And about a week after I got back, my best friend from high school, my first and pretty much only best friend in the beginning, and it still is one of my best friends, she called me and said, hey, I'm moving out of my cute little cottage here in Santa Barbara, California. Do you want to move in? And I said, yeah. Why not? Santa Barbara's a heck of a lot closer to San Francisco than Northampton. So 3 months later, I packed up my 2-door hatchback, green Gertie Subaru, and I drove cross country, and I moved to Santa Barbara, California. I never made it to San Francisco. I stayed in Santa Barbara, California for just over 17 years. I built an incredible life there. I had a great singing career where I sang for some pretty amazing people. I worked at the Santa Barbara Public Library where I got congressional commendations for my work. And I built a wonderful network of friends who became my family. And they became my family because about a year after I got to Santa Barbara, I had done a lot of therapy, as you can only do in Southern California. I did a lot of therapy and called my family and I said I was done with hiding. I was done with pretending that everything was okay and that I needed to talk and talk it out. And they were not receptive at all. My father disowned me. He told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. He sent me letters and emails calling me names, liar, asshole. I think the clincher was when he called me a 5-year-old whore. And so I distanced, and the whole family distanced. We just kept apart for 10 years. We didn't speak for 10 years. And that's why my family in Santa Barbara, my family of friends, became so essential. They saved me. So after about 10 years, I got an email from my father out of the blue. And in the email, he said, I am willing to sweep everything under the rug. I am willing to pretend nothing happened. And after the many years of therapy I had done, I realized that this was his olive branch. This was his apology. This was what I was going to get. And so I called him, and we talked. And I booked a flight to go back to Massachusetts and have a family reunion. Now, about a year after my mother died, my father remarried to my stepmother, who turned out to be the love of his life. She was a good woman. She definitely gave him some balance. And so when I flew back, that's where we had the family reunion, was at her house. He had moved into her house. And we had a big family barbecue. At this time, my brother and sister had 6 kids, one who I didn't even meet, hadn't even met yet. And we had a good time. We had a great family barbecue. We hung out on the beach. We tossed the football around. Take that, Kennedy's at Hyannisport. And it felt like I had a family. Like, what is this weird thing? These weird people. These are my family. And it was good. We didn't talk about the past. We stayed pretty rooted in the present, and it was good. I flew back to Santa Barbara, and 3 days later, I got a phone call from my sister. She had just been diagnosed with lung cancer, and it had metastasized, just like my mom. So I flew back 3 times to help in any way I could with her, and 9 months later, she passed away. It was really difficult. There was a silver lining in that she and I repaired some, and also that my family got closer because of it. So I started going out once a year. I started to fly back and have vacations and get to know my family, and it was good. About 3 years later, my stepmother started to fail, and she passed away. And my father wasn't doing very well. He had lived with depression his entire life, and after my sister's death, and then his wife's death, second wife's death, it was really hard, and he fell into a deep crevasse of depression. I flew back for my stepmother's funeral. And I was talking with my niece, my lovely niece, my sister's daughter, and I just threw out there, like, maybe I could come back to take care of Boppy. That was the grandkid's name for my dad, Boppy. And she said, why not? Give it a shot, try it. So I flew back to Santa Barbara, and I couldn't believe I had been thinking this, like, what, gonna move back to my hometown? Like, take care of my father? What, am I crazy? Santa Barbara's beautiful, like what? Well, that restless spirit, that roaming spirit, I had been feeling like I might be done with Santa Barbara. Yes, it's beautiful, but it's dry. It's really, really dry. And I had been evacuated twice for fires. And dear friends had lost everything in the devastating Tea Fire. And so I had been thinking of moving even farther west to Kauai, to the island of Kauai, which reminded me of Rockport in the summers. So I did a lot of soul searching. and I conferred with my family of friends, and I decided to move back. So on April 13th, 2010, I flew back and moved in with my father to take care of him. It was not easy. It was not easy. He knew how to push my buttons. Oh my God, it was hard. But we also repaired a lot. He asked for my forgiveness. He apologized. I forgave him. I was no angel taking care of him, and I asked him to forgive me for maybe not being the nicest person, and he did. And we repaired a lot. We were closer than we'd ever been. And 5 years later, he died, very sudden, horrific death. And I was there. I got to be there, and I held him, and he died in my arms. And I won't regret that ever. So here I am, 5 years later. I'm still here. I have an incredible band that I get to sing with. Hopefully I'll get to sing with again. I work for the fabulous local library. I love my job. And I have a family and friends who I adore. I believe it was Tolkien who once said, "You can be just as faithful to a place as to a person." And I believe that because I fell in love with my hometown again. I fell in love with the craggy shoreline, the lush, verdant, almost tropical summers, the breathtaking colors of fall, and even the winters, yes, even the winters, with their stark beauty. I fell in love with it all. So here I am, still restless, still want to roam a little, but at 52, this fifth-generation Rockporter can say, she's home.
Anne McArdle is the grand champion of redos. She started her career in finance and then veered into writing. She's written books and plays, and her articles have appeared in journals and on podcasts. This kind of career change is the stuff of dreams for desk jockeys like me.
Are there two Anne McArdles? Asked a judge in court one summer day in the summer of 1969. I was 21 years old, standing next to him in the witness box, biting down on my cheek, trying not to laugh. Here's what got us to that point. A guy stole a motorcycle. It was a BMW. Apparently, he thought he could confuse things if he changed out the license plate on that motorcycle. So, being a smart motorcycle thief, he stole a plate off of my motorcycle, which was a Honda. That apparently was the limit of his motorcycle thief intelligence. However, a few hours later, he was stopped for speeding. Idiot. So they ran his plates, saw that it was registered to Anne McArdle and that it was a Honda. So the cops called me up. At that time, I was living in an apartment in Cambridge, but I had registered the motorcycle in my parents' home in Massachusetts. In Melrose, Massachusetts, because insurance was cheaper there. So it was my mother who was roused from her sound sleep at 2 a.m. to answer the phone, waiting to find out which of her kids was in trouble. And she heard Officer so-and-so ask for me. She's not here, my mother said. What happened? Officer so-and-so answered that question with a question, which was, does she own a Honda BMW motorcycle? To which my mother, now in a blind panic, because that question was confirmation that I was lying in a heap on a slab in the morgue, she said, yes, she does. What happened? Tell me what happened. So finally then, Officer so-and-so said, oh, she's not in trouble. Her motorcycle was stolen and I've recovered it. To which my mother said something like, oh, for God's sake, and agreed that I would call in the morning, which I did. Officer so-and-so wasn't on duty, of course, he'd been on duty all night. So I left a message that I did, in fact, own a Honda motorcycle, and it was still in my possession, but the license plate was missing. Several weeks later, I was subpoenaed to appear in the Middlesex District Court in the matter of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus the motorcycle thief. So I wore my navy blue leather mini dress. It was 1969. It was a motorcycle issue. And I stood in that witness box while the lawyers, who apparently had not reviewed the case before they went into court, tried to figure out what was going on, and they flummoxed around with the alleged theft and the alleged motorcycle thief and the alleged Anne McArdle and the alleged Honda BMW motorcycle. And the judge had his head in his hands, going over papers, trying to figure out what they were talking about, and finally looked up and said, stop. Are there two Anne McArdles? At which point I bit down really hard on my cheek. And when nobody answered that question, I said, I think I can explain, Your Honor. And he said, please, please do. So I did tell him that, yes, indeed, I own a Honda motorcycle, that my license plate had been stolen, not my motorcycle, and that there's no such thing as a Honda BMW. That's like a Chevy Ford, for God's sake. So the trial proceeded. I was dismissed, and that was that. A few days later, I was driving my Honda Dream 250 with its temporary plate down Mass Ave in Cambridge. I was wearing a bright pink mini dress with orange tights and my helmet, pretty cute. And I was surrounded by 6 or 7 guys on bikes. That wasn't all that uncommon. In that time, there weren't that many girls driving motorcycles in Cambridge, and certainly not dressed the way I was. So I kind of looked over and waved and kept driving, didn't pay much attention. But the guy beside me was jazzing his motorcycle back and forth, and he finally yelled, hey! And I looked over, and he had flipped up his face mask and was pointing at his face. It was the motorcycle thief. So I flashed him a peace sign, 1969, remember? And he gave me a thumbs up, accelerated, and he and his boys took off down Mass Ave. So that was the summer of 1969. I had no idea that by December of that same year, I would be married and in Uruguay, where I had gone for my honeymoon, but would end up staying 3 years. Redo on a redo. I've recently written a memoir about those years in South America, and in the process of doing that, I went back over a box of letters from me that my mother had saved from different times and different places. So many redos. That box was like a catalog of the redos of my life. Without even realizing it, I was drumming out a rhythm to my life. Every few years, I would change a different house, a different state, a different country, a different job, different hobbies, different pets. Sometimes it was my choice to make the changes. Other times I had no choice at all. A couple of things were constant and overlapped from time to time, from one change to another. the first husband lasted from South America through Cornell University and back to Connecticut. And the six-toed cat, Thelma Thumb, came with me from Connecticut to Massachusetts. And Nick, of course, from the time he was born, I was his mother. That never changed, whether he was with me physically or not. And now I'm the grandmother of his children. Can I tell you about my grandchildren? I have pictures. Only kidding. But I was thinking about that day in court when that judge asked that question. Are there two Anne McArdles? And I thought, more than two, Your Honor. Way, way more than two. Peace out, everyone. Thank you.
Eric Baumeister is filling our quarantine time with coffee, more coffee, and strip mining the world for writing ideas. Let's see what he comes up with in the redo department.
Hello. I was done with swimming when I was like 16, junior year of high school. I was doing 9 practices a week pretty consistently, and it was eating up all of my spare time and my sleep time and my work time and my homework time and my family time and my me time and my friends' time. It was this big, fat, 8-year-old hungry baby, and I was done. My coach was a bastard, and my teammates were, like you can say about some people that they're like assholes or jackasses. But these people were mean. Like pretty arbitrarily, decisively mean. So I was done. And then suddenly 9 2-hour blocks of my life just kind of opened up. And I didn't know what to do. I was kind of desperate for things to do. I'm sure you can empathize with that in this current climate. It was a little bit like leaving church. I'm Catholic, and like many kids my age, I'm not Catholic anymore. Basically, long story short, spotlight broke, and Mom ejected us from church real quick. Go, Mom. But a couple briars ended up catching. The most notable and biggest and most haunting is Catholic guilt. A lot has been spoken about it. A lot has been theorized about it. I've been told that the closest analog, for the most part, is Jewish guilt or other ecclesiastical guilt. I think the key difference between Catholic guilt and other kinds of guilt is like for example, Jewish guilt has as it's been explained to me, has rules. I mean, there's a tangible feeling of like thousands of years of your dead ancestors looking at you and counting on you to bang your Marblehead crush at birthright. And like the rules for the most part are fairly straightforward. Like we gotta survive. Catholic guilt has no rules. It does. Like technically you're not supposed to use condoms, but like everyone does. Catholic guilt doesn't really mind whether or not you obey its thousands of rules. Catholic guilt is more interested in messing with you. Catholic guilt is like the friend you have from the ages of 11 to 13. You're not sure why you hang out with Catholic guilt. Catholicism isn't really sure why it hangs out with you, and I'm sure that at any point in the relationship, if you find out why that is, the relationship is doomed. Catholicism has a perverse love of messing with you. Occasionally, Catholicism will come up to you with a smile on its face and say, "Hey, how's it going? So, don't freak out. Just, between you and me, I heard a rumor. I just thought you'd be the first to know it because I care about you. I don't think God likes you very much. I don't think it's anything you've done. It's just, are you sure you're doing your best? Now, Catholicism knows all your secrets. Catholicism has asked for your secrets many times. Catholicism would never make up a rumor like that. It hangs on for a bit. So after I quit swimming, Catholic guilt just kind of crept back into my life again. Like, what are you going to do? You decided to evacuate the second church you subscribed to. What are you going to do now? I had no standards for stuff that I did. I slept more. I hung out with people I didn't like. I swung so far opposite for athletics, I joined an ultimate frisbee pickup league. What's worse, I liked it. I was so bad at it. It was so freeing. I don't have to compete at a national sphere because, it's there, but who watches it? I showed up Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock at Bielek Park in Ipswich. It's still there. You should show up when all this is over. Most of them were teachers, people of 40 and up, a couple of high schoolers like me, most of them dropouts from various sports they decided to evacuate. And it was fun. I did it for a couple of years. I graduated from painfully bad to not the last person to be picked, but I still talk to them. Summer of 2015, God decided to text me after all of these years. He decided to send me a pack of good Catholic boys from St. John's Prep, which, if you don't know, is an all-Catholic boy school. They moved big, they talked big, they did things without much concern and very decisively, often with disastrous consequences. They're teenagers. They were pledges to God's frat. They were all kind of nice. Except one. This man was a dick. I say that mostly because he looked like an actual phallus. He looked like a sausage that had grown arms and legs and moved like it. He was also a dick. He was not a nice man. He was yeah. It was July and the peak of summer, and we were all hot, and it was mosquitoes, and I had brought along some friends who were also not good. And I quickly realized he was mean. He was the guy who was saying, why didn't you run faster? Why didn't you catch that? Which, first off, it's Frisbee. There are no stakes. And second off, he's saying it to my friends. So I decided to let him know how much of a dick he was. Wasn't anything grand. It was just you're a dick. I was a very brave 20-year-old. The conversation went you're a dick, fuck off, bye. When we parted ways. It was a good conversation. And then next week he didn't show up. And neither did his pack of good Catholic boys. And I felt kind of triumphant, I see you, God, trying to get me to care. And then the week after that, he didn't show up, and neither did any of the good Catholic boys, and I played the best game of my life. And at the end, the music teacher that brought them all at the beginning sat us all down kumbaya style and told us that the dick had died. And the wake was in 2 days. I don't know if you've been to a wake. Wakes suck. Funerals have the decency of following 3 pretty simple tenets. First off, it's short. It's an hour, not including the burial. But it's you're in, we mourn, we're out. Second off, the family has a little bit of time before the funeral in order to pull the short straw to see who's the representative that goes in front of the audience in the pews and blubbers in front of them. And the rest of the family is in the front row, and they're supportive, but mostly the brunt is on one person, and for 2 minutes. And And third, you don't have to talk with the body. You don't have to have a conversation with the body. That's not on the docket. It's up on the altar, just a picture or something. It can stay there. We don't have to go up to it. Wakes break all the rules. Wakes are sadistic. The Dick's took about like 3 hours. The first hour was in tar melting heat. It was like, again, deep July. There's a line snaking through the tarmac of a parking lot to this funeral home. We end up right behind the good Catholic boy pack, his best friends in the whole world. They are still moving big. They're the drunk uncles at the wedding. They're kind of having the time of their lives at the moment. They're flopping around in their suits. They are, at the moment, very forthcoming. They're confessing semi-secrets, conversations they've had outside of Five Guys at 2 a.m. in a Subaru, like that kind of stuff. Real teenage, hot, sweaty stuff. And I don't remember any of it. It wasn't very interesting, but like the moment was there. The second hour, there's a membrane at the door. And as we pass through it, the temperature plummets. We've gone from very sticky to frozen. And there is a silence. The pack of good Catholic boys by this point are frozen. Their suits are sticking to them. They've gone very pale. The line snakes through the funeral home. There are tables dotted like islands along the sides. Photographs of him. Him at 10, holding a baby, 1 year old. Poetry and drawings, 6 to 16. The third hour is in the room itself with him. It is the casket, bench, where you kneel in front of the body, and the family. And in front of the casket, there are about a dozen rows of fold-out chairs, all unoccupied except for one. She's 10. I think she's a sister or a cousin. What's happening is she is in line with the rest of the family, shaking the hands of 100 strangers who are there to tell her how sorry they are for her loss, that they're very sorry to see that her cousin, brother, person decided to kill himself. And she's being very brave. And she's swelling and swelling and swelling. And then finally, after a little while, the floodgates break. She's got to go into one of the fold-out chairs and just wring herself out of all the water in her. She'll stay still for about 5 minutes. And then she'll stand up, excuse herself, and go back into the line. She did this about 4 times when we were in the room. The pack of good Catholic boys are inconsolable. They are bawling bravely to themselves. They fiercely kneel at the bench in front of the body. They silently yell their prayers to him and God and whoever's going to listen. And then they stand up and they just kind of cling to the parents. Everybody knows each other. Nothing really needs to be said except for a couple names and like "oh," just basic onomatopoeia. And they hold each other for a very long time, which gives me and the agnostic friend that I brought along a lot of time to kneel in front of the dick. Like, I see you, God. He doesn't look any less stupid in the casket. He looks waxy and bloated. I decided to appeal to God there. I didn't know what to say to him. So I decided to talk to God, and I'm like, okay, God, you win. I am a very mean man. I'll do better. The friends detach themselves. I say a quick goodbye to the corpse. I stand up, I move away from the carcass to the parents. Dad, by this point, is still wringing himself out. My agnostic friend decides to comfort him with a hug, just kind of holds him. The mom, I quickly hug and shake her hand, and she asks how I knew her son. I told her I played Frisbee with him, and she asked if it was at school at St. John's. And I said no. And that was that, and we hugged again, and we left. I don't know what you redo in that situation. I really don't. I hold no illusion that anything I might have said would prevent this man from taking his own life. He was a very troubled kid. But I don't know. I really hope that somebody in that. First off, I hope that, like, kneeling in front of the body, I would have said, I'm sorry to him. God doesn't need to be part of this conversation. I can just say to him, I'm so sorry. I am a delicate instrument held by nothing, and you're a zealot who ate himself. And I wish that in the moment, like on that field getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, I would have had the courage and the decency and the patience to say, I love you, in the way that anybody should love anybody, in the way that anybody should be loved.
Peggy Lyman is a special ed teacher in Rockport, and she lives in Gloucester with her husband and 4 children. You can find her sometimes downtown directing traffic while her children are careening down the street on makeshift go-karts made out of skateboards and other found objects. Peggy also likes to hike in the woods, and you can sometimes find her lighting candles by the Help Mother boulder in Dogtown. Let's welcome Peggy.
Back in the winter, Kaycee asked me to share a story, and I said yes. Then I chickened out. And then I wrote this story, and I realized sometimes the story is not about the person telling the story, if they can craft a story or if they can share a story. None of which I know if I can or can't do. But that sometimes a story is just a story to be shared. And so this is my redo story, and it's a story of rebirth. I met Dr. Isaacson after a sticky placenta, an ugly DNC, followed by years of infertility. Finally, I met him because someone on the internet told me he was one of the best. Dr. Isaacson is a minimally invasive gynecologist. It's even hard to say all those syllables. He is calm, cool, and has the driest sense of humor that you hope your minimally invasive gynecologist to have. And I got right into his office at Newton Wellesley because I volunteered for my procedure to be videoed live to Harvard medical students. And we both confirmed that what we thought was that my uterus was covered in scar tissue. And so as I lay in a vulnerable, intimate position, and from experience knowing that when scar tissue is touched, I have a vagal response, I would lock my gaze into my husband's eyes, voluntarily birth breathing, while Dr. Isaacson took the world's longest, gentlest, and most delicate scissors I have ever seen and went up and cut open that scar tissue. And for a long 25 minutes, I tried to lock into my husband's gaze. And when he was done and I started to involuntarily breathe, a wave of relief swept over that I would never, ever have to do that again. Dr. Isaacson quickly told me to schedule my next appointment for that same surgery. After 4 of those minimally invasive surgeries, Dr. Isaacson told me I had enough room for one teeny embryo in my uterus. He gave me pamphlets and phone numbers and sent Chris and I on our way. When I walked down the hall to the IVF clinic at Brigham and Women's, I had to turn down a blue hallway covered in birds and an Emily Dickinson quote. This hallway was different than any other white, sterile hallway I walked through. And I entered into that IVF clinic with a small percentage of medically induced hope. 9 months later, when Dash was born, it felt like Resurrection Day. The first person I called was Dr. Isaacson. 3.5 years later, without any minimally invasive gynecologist or IVF clinic, when Gabriel was born, that felt like beyond belief. And when Gabriel was born, we didn't know if he was a boy or a girl. And when I had him, my husband's first response was, "Oh my gosh, another boy!" And I looked at my husband, a little appalled, but at the same time, with all the assurance I've ever had, I told him his name was Gabriel. And it was a name we never thought of or spoke of before. Followed by Gabriel's birth, I went from week to week of infection and illness. And precisely 12 weeks after Gabriel was born, I crawled into Dr. Friedman's office. When Dr. Friedman entered the room, he cupped my 2 hands in his and made a slight bow. The kind of bow I made growing up in the Catholic and Episcopal Church when the cross was preceded in. The kind of bow that told me I was entering sacred space, the space where life and death were so close to each other. And as I sat on the Dana-Farber exam table with my legs hanging over the precipice, he listened to my panicked breathing, my labored heart, and he told me I'd go through hell in the next couple months. But because I trusted and loved this man, I got off that table and followed him. And my treatment consisted of week-long chemos, and I would start at Dana-Farber and get my last coffee for the next 3 weeks because they had a Starbucks. And I'd walk down this hallway that was painted blue and had an Emily Dickinson quote and birds on it. And it felt like deja vu, but I couldn't remember why I knew this hallway in my cancer brain. And I'd do my chemo, and the week later I'd be wheeled back down that same blue hallway for checkups. And slowly I got better. And when I saw him for a well checkup last August, he looked at me and he asked how I was. I entered that confession booth one more time, full of self-pity. I laid it all out for him. I told him I was tired. I told him I went from cancer to mothering 4 children to teaching full-time. And now my youngest is seeing his colleagues 2 floors up with what they just told me was lowercase c cancer or neurofibromatosis. I wanted some medically percentage of hope to hang on to. I wanted him to get me a get out of jail card. But he didn't. He looked at me and he told me, "Peg, all you can do is put one foot in front of the other." I think if anyone else would have told me that, I would have punched them in the face. But it was enough to get me off that exam table and start again. And when I last saw him, I started at Dana and I had to go to Brigham's. And I went down that blue hallway again, and it registered why I knew this hallway. It's where Dash was made. And I looked up and there was a title and the hallway said, Bridge of Hope. I said, of course. When I met Dr. Ulrich, I knew I would love her. She was not only a brilliant neurologist, she was not only kind, but she understood what it was to be a mother. And after that first meeting with her, my son, and my husband, I knew we would never move far for the next 17 years of his life. And when Dr. Ulrich talked words like tumor, chemotherapy to me, she saw the PTSD in my eyes. She saw the fear I had as a mom for her child. And she got it and she held it. If she wasn't my son's neurologist and she lived in town, I'd probably go for walks and out for coffee with her. We talk about husbands and work and life. This time when Gabe was being diagnosed last spring, and he was going for an MRI that took twice as long, I happened to push by on an expensive pair of yellow shoes made from water bottles, recyclable water bottles. My friend Tracy said, if you have the right pair of shoes, sometimes things are a little bit easier. And I was willing to bet $125 that I would have a sliver of ease right now. On my appointment with Dr. Ulrich in August with Gabe, I wore my yellow shoes made from recyclable water bottles. And as she entered the room, she looked at them and she told me she liked my shoes. I said, thank you. Then she told me she had the same pair. I knew we were kindred spirits, but it was even deeper now. Most people buy black or even red, but not yellow. Then she told me her whole staff actually had the same pair of shoes as me. She said, here, Peg, look at this picture. And she pulled out her phone and showed me 6 pairs of legs and feet with the same yellow shoes I wore. She told me they got these shoes because this was a color to support childhood cancer. I never looked up those 2 words together on the internet, so I didn't know that. When I got into my car that day, I buckled Gabriel in and I sat in that front seat. And I just wept. Because for that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. I had this whole team of doctors walking that same blue hallway with me. And I got to start again, and I got to let go. I wrote this poem. I'd like to share it. Hope. I love her, but she is often clothed in a cloak of invisibility until I'm hit on the head by a brick or a piece of gold. Thank you.
Kaycee Breton is our storyteller in residence. When she took on this role, I don't think she would have imagined that she'd be spending so much time in her own residence, where she's the guru of picking things up and putting them back for her 3 sons and her husband. Kaycee works at the Common Crow, where she's an essential worker, woohoo! And she also has a book coming out in September for middle graders. Best of all, Kaycee is a gifted storyteller, so let's get her started.
We know we're supposed to teach our kids right from wrong. How to be kind, how to fix what we break, how to take the higher ground. There will be moments when we can see the positive effects taking hold. We'll say, wow, what great kids, and what a good job I did teaching them right from wrong. Those moments will be sparse and fleeting. They will not always feel rewarding, because while we might appreciate our children's ability to stand on a moral high ground, we might also hate them for being so smug about it. every time they force us to practice what we preach is an invitation we did not ask for. This is a story about that and what comes next. So, as some of you know, I've been working on a young adult novel for the last 1,000 years. The main character is a teenage boy with a severe stutter. I'm constantly doing research into the world of stuttering. On one particular day, I was reading through a brochure from the Stuttering Foundation. It was the do's and don'ts for speaking with a person who stutters. Do, maintain eye contact. Don't finish the person's sentences. Do, listen closely. Don't tell the person to relax or just slow down. Do, give the person enough time to talk. Don't rudely tell Ponytail Jamie to just spit it out already. You really are an asshole, aren't you? That last one, it was strange. I read it again. Don't rudely tell Ponytail Jamie to just spit it out already. You really are an asshole, aren't you? I set the brochure down as a flaming arrow came barreling through the sky and pierced through my thick skull, bringing with it a long suppressed memory. Let me back up. Ponytail Jamie was a lovely guy I met my freshman year of college. A thoughtful, Teva-wearing, tent-sleeping, animal-loving, sensitive ponytail guy. Not a mean bone in his body. Out of nowhere, I'm sitting at my desk thinking about Ponytail Jamie and the time we went for a walk down the sidewalk, not far from our dorms, 25 years ago. It was a beautiful spring day. Fruit blossoms dotted the trees, birds were singing, butterflies were fluttering, and Ponytail Jamie and I were walking, strolling along and talking. Or rather, trying to talk. What I didn't know then, but realized with laser clarity as I read through that brochure from the Stuttering Foundation 25 years later, is that Jamie had a stutter. And what came barreling through the sky on that flaming arrow, aimed at my thick skull, were the words that I said to him on that perfect spring day as he struggled to get out a sentence. Jesus, Jamie, can you spit it out already? That night, I sat with my 3 boys at dinner, and I talked to them about what I had learned that day about speaking with a person who stutters. And then I told them about the time back in college that I was very mean to a person who stuttered. And that even though I didn't know then what I know now, it doesn't change the fact that I was very mean to him. So are you going to apologize? That was my oldest son. He was looking straight at me when he asked the question. His 2 younger brothers were looking up at him, and then they turned to me, and the 3 of them just staring at me, blinking, waiting to find out what kind of person their mother really is. I said, interesting question. Well, you said you were mean to him. Are you going to apologize? The kitchen suddenly becomes very hot and uncomfortable. I can feel myself being pushed to the edge of something very high up. I cannot see the bottom. You think I should apologize? Yeah, he says, and the other two nod in agreement. But that was such a long time ago. Maybe I'm not even remembering correctly. Maybe he doesn't even have a stutter. They say nothing, and I'm forced to admit that I'm pretty sure he did. I can't even remember his last name. Do the alphabet trick. I'm wishing I never taught them the alphabet trick. A, B, C, D. It's a D name, and it's like a common kind of last name. Donaldson. It's Donaldson. I feel falsely victorious. But I don't even know where he is or how to find him. Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account. Use Abba's. Abba is their dad. Next thing I know, the four of us are leaving the kitchen and walking in a little herd toward the computer. Excitement shines like the sun on their faces. I feel ill and scared. I sit down on the stool and the three of them gather around me. I turn on the computer. Jamie Donaldson, I type, but really what I'm thinking is fuck the higher ground. Finding Jamie Donaldson was surprisingly easy. After I typed in his name, a few faces popped up, and I looked them over and quickly found his. 25 years older, but definitely him. Oh my God, that's him, I squeal. The kids smile with arrogant pride. I lean in a little closer to get a better look. Oh my God, that's him. Ponytail Jamie has lost his ponytail, and what is left behind is a very handsome fire chief, like a real fire chief, like the kind who might pose nude in a fundraiser calendar. And he is on Facebook. Use Abba's account, they instruct, pushing me closer to the edge with a hot cattle prod. I log in and find his page. Now what? Send him a message. Send him a message? Yeah. Well, what am I supposed to say? Just tell him that you're sorry. I can't just tell him that I'm sorry. That would be really weird. They shrug. Okay, fine. How about I'll just send him a message, see if he remembers me, and tell him that a funny thing came up that made me think of him. Okay? Hi, Jamie, I type. I'm not sure if you remember me, but this is Kaycee Breton. I'm using my husband's account because I live under a rock and don't have one of my own. And this is where I get pushed completely over the edge, because after I write in that bit, I want to get to the next line. So I hit the return button. Right. The message gets sent. Now, this is me who has spent 1,000 years writing a teen novel, sending off an unproofed message to a guy I haven't seen in 25 years. The kids who have been reading over my shoulder this whole time burst out laughing. Quick, what do I do? They got nothing for me. Hey, just kidding about that rock bit. Anyway, a funny thing came up that made me think of you. Here's my email and my phone number if you're up for it. Send. A few days later, there is a message from handsome Fire Chief Jamie sitting in my email inbox. Sure, he'd love to talk, and here's his number. I am now free-falling, and the bottom is nowhere in sight. The drop is nauseating. I look up and can only see the faces of my 3 boys. It takes me a few days to muster the courage to call. My heart is racing and I'm sweating, but I do it. Hi, Jamie. This is Kaycee. A funny thing came up that made me think of you, but first, I have to ask. Do you stutter? Yes, he tells me he does. And it was really bad back in college. Okay then, I owe you an apology. Handsome Fire Chief Jamie is exactly as lovely as I remembered him. We ended up talking for over an hour, and it was really nice. The next night at dinner, I recount the conversation to my kids. So did you apologize? They ask. I did, I tell them. And they just sort of like, okay, like it was no big deal. And for them, it was no big deal. No forethought, no afterthought, just a cliff and an invitation to leap into a redo. This is everyday life with kids, which is what makes the story of raising children such an unbelievable and irresistible page-turner. Thank you. And thank you for going virtual with us this time around.